for archives, archives for researchers. And our first presenter is
here, in the computer. He's in London.
Is Mark Minenko, and his title of his presentation is Searching Unusual Places Beyond Ukrainian Funds. And
on the screen?
It's his video presentation. I'll say if you would just hold please.
So Mark Minenko is currently a PhD law student at King's College, London, having completed his undergraduate law degree at the University of Manitoba and his LLM at the University of Alberta. His research focuses on civilian rights during war and conflicts, focusing on the administration of justice in Canada during the First World War under emergency powers legislation. He has presented papers and led seminars in Canada, Australia, Germany, and in Bosnia, where he was serving as the assistant of the NATO political advisor during the transition from NATO to the EU in 2004. He was part of the distance learning faculty of Royal Military College in Canada, teaching courses in leadership and ethics, defense, management, and the Canadian Armed Forces and Canadian politics. He has been a barrister and solicitor in Canada for over 30 years. And I won't continue with all his other preoccupations, but he also is a very interesting scholar, and we're happy to have him as a part of this panel, even though from London.
Just a small technical detail. So Mark's presentation is recorded on video in order to avoid technical hoops. So we will hear his presentation. He's connected with us right now through Skype, so he can hear you. You can say hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Okay. And then
Good afternoon, and I have a special guest to introduce us, or introduce me. So if you just bear with me, he'll join us in a moment. Yes, I'd like to introduce our friend Mark Minenko, but unfortunately I can't stay much longer with you. And I do have some things down in Windsor I have to tend to. So thank you very much.
So Mark will be able to answer your questions afterwards, and we will help you with that. Okay.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you for coming out. And again, thank you inviting me to attend, and as Marina had mentioned, just in case there were technical difficulties, I did prepare a presentation, 17 and a half minutes, so 2.5 minutes short of the maximum, and I look forward to participating in the question and answers later on, and as well as listening to the other presenters.
Thank you, Mark. We are starting.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Minenko, and I would like to first thank the organizers of this timely conference. Timely in the sense that over the last number of years, many of the archives have been releasing documents that were previously under time restrictions and now are accessible to the public. I'd like to also, over the next few minutes, introduce you to some of the research I've done and some of the documents that I've found looking at various unusual places for Ukrainian material. Searches for records relating to issues impacting Ukrainians in Canada can be challenging. This may be as a result of the fact that records have been destroyed, or those who had initially cataloged the records may not have appreciated the multidisciplinary aspect to those records. An example is the search for First World War interment records. With a little creativity, and more importantly, an understanding of the process, I have been able to find thousands and thousands of records which have previously been undiscovered. Many of these records relate also to the lives and times of Ukrainians in Canada, and not just related to the internment issue. My presentation will provide some insight into how one can approach a search for records about Ukrainians, by looking first at the Police and Justice Department records at the Provincial Archives of Alberta, and then at the Royal Northwest Mounted Police records at the Library Archives Canada. Some of the records I have found, and which I have included in this presentation, are of a disturbing nature. My experience and work as a lawyer for over 30 years, my work as a member of the military reserves for over 36 years, also as a politician and as a civil servant involved in the development and drafting of legislation, has allowed me to tackle archival searches based on the understanding of the processes and the paperwork inherent in all these 4 areas, all of which impact the lives of Canadians. First, I'd like to acknowledge my research in this area has been assisted by funding from 3 sources. This list of archives are also those which I have visited and which have yielded tens of thousands of pages of information over the last 2 years of research. I list the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies first on my listing of archives, as I'd like to thank Tsius and Yars Balan, who provided me some raw searches of newspaper articles in 2015. After a quick analysis of this material, I noticed certain trends, especially in the criminal court reports. And applying my understanding of the criminal justice system, I have looked at over 100,000 criminal cases these past few years to find some of the material which I will show you today. Okay, one of the greatest sources of information on the administration of justice in Canada during the First World War has been the Provincial Archives of Alberta. I have spent so much time there that the archive staff and I were on first-name basis, and they started referring public inquiries to me. So on to how I used the archives to find interesting and intimate details about thousands of people, information which their families probably do not know. The quest begins with the card index from where I discovered the Department of Justice records. Information about these records is found in binders indicating when and what departments were archived. This one index of justice records shows where to find police and justice of the peace records. When you open the index, one finds hundreds of pages similar to this one. Of particular interest to my research are the monthly reports filed by the Royal Northwest Mounted Police with the Provincial Department of Justice. These records are indicated in the lower half of this page. So when one looks at what these records are all about, one finds a particular document, and I'll just show that to you in a moment. There are several bits of information you can find here which either can answer your question or can lead you to more detailed records. This document that I'll show you in a moment first has information about every person who appeared in a particular courthouse where the Royal Northwest Mounted Police had jurisdiction. This example is from Banff. From left to right, you have the place and the date someone was charged, who charged them, the name of the accused, the charge, the place where the court was held, the date, who was the justice of the peace, and the disposition. Depending upon what one is doing, your search can end here. But being a curious researcher, as I expect most of us are, I took some of this information and found more information. You'll notice the circle highlighted part at the top indicates the name of the justice of the peace. The larger indicated portion at the bottom indicates 2 of the men were in fact sentenced to be interned at Castle Mountain. Judges and justices of the peace keep records today, and they also kept the same records or similar records 100 years ago. These records were required under the Criminal Code of Canada. As a result, I went to another source to find the justice of the peace information. Justice of the peace are important because they handled all the minor cases in Canada's courts, but they also held preliminary inquiries to determine if there was sufficient evidence to take the matter to a higher court level. Please note, evidence at preliminaries were recorded by court reporters, and I have found dozens of these records of life on the prairies and, more interestingly, the relationship between people. This information is useful to many types of research, not just in law. So this is the document that one finds when one looks for a listing of who the justices of the peace were in Alberta. This then indicates a page showing and listing all the various justices of the peace. They're not done in alphabetical order, but by the day that they were appointed. You'll notice here I've highlighted one particular justice of the peace, a man by the name of Pennefather, who was also an inspector with the police department. In Western Canada, members of the RCMP, or Royal Northwest Mounted Police at that time, were also appointed as Justice of the Peace. So by looking at the information that I've circled, you can then ask and search that particular Justice of the Peace record using that particular number. This is one of the records that one finds in these files. When a Justice of the Peace finds someone, the fine needed to be remitted to the government, and there was a form which went with the JP's check. This is the form. It has quite a bit of interesting information, including the fact that the accused person paid the Justice of the Peace and the police to arrest and convict them. That information is at the bottom of the form. Interesting to note on the right-hand side of this slide is that there were 3 Justices of the Peace in Alberta who seemed to have not only the greatest number of Ukrainians appearing before them for offenses of not reporting as alien enemies, but also their conviction rates were the highest. Many of these were illegal charges. All 3 were either serving or recently retired members of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. This next record that I'll show you is an important record kept on everyone who appeared before a Justice of the Peace. This is going to be the record of the outcome of the individual trial or hearing. This was the form left in the Justice of the Peace office after the information and complaint form, which was the charge sheet, was given to the accused person. When you look at this form, I've highlighted a number of bits of information on it. You have the name and the place of the person and the place where the trial was held. Just below that is the charge and the law that they are charged with. Below that indicates the penalty. And in this situation, it indicates that Fort Saskatchewan could be a default if they don't make the payment of the fine. And right at the bottom, which on this form is on the right-hand side of this slide, are some interesting Justice of the Peace comments. Some interesting information about this man that I'm sure his family today is probably unaware of, that he was in fact a saucy fellow who might cause trouble with other people. So this form is an example of the spreadsheet that I've put together of approximately 2,400 names and charges that were of interest in my research. From left to right, you'll notice the place that they were charged, their names, what the charge was, the date they were charged, their fine, the costs, who the judge or the Justice of the Peace were, and the police officer. From this sort of information, you can then distinguish trends. Earlier, I had mentioned that my research began from newspaper articles. As I mentioned earlier, Cius had provided me with a number of newspaper clippings. This next slide will show you information about one particular gentleman by the name of Joe Zaprozan, who was charged with failing to report and was sentenced to jail for 1 month, or, as the reporter put it towards the bottom of this article, as a consequence of his indifference, he will be free from the worry of the high cost of living for the next month, which he will spend at the government's hostelry in Fort Saskatchewan. That was the provincial jail. He was one of many, but he had the wherewithal to hire a lawyer. The court records I was able to find as a result of this information confirmed that he was in fact released after he had hired a lawyer, and the charge was thrown out of court, particularly for the reason that the Crown did not send a lawyer to defend the charge, as the Attorney General felt it was not worth the effort. These are examples of the documents which alien enemies had to carry on their person at all time, and they also had to ensure that the document was in good order. Otherwise, they could be charged with a criminal offense. These documents recorded their reporting schedules and confirmed when and where they went, and did they have the authorization to move outside of the area where they lived. Based on the information of the previous two slides, I was able to put together a detailed listing of how this man moved around Western Canada looking for work. Someone suggested that he might be Dr. Bogdan Klimash's father-in-law, but I checked with his daughter and this was no relation to them. I was hoping to learn more about the man and his circumstances. Now you'll notice I've put in red some of the information, and that would indicate potential charges that he could have been charged with prior to the event that led to him going to jail. This next slide indicates is an example of how the police and justices of the peace seemingly did not understand the law or chose to ignore it, and illegally charged and jailed a man from the Leduc area. Some of the information is indicated on the right of the slide, but of note is the fact that the law at that time said if you were not of any fixed abode, you had to register. Clearly, from the police criminal report, it's very clear that in fact he has lived in Canada for 5 years and a homestead is given for him. He should not have been charged with this offense. So when Nick Koltika was in fact convicted and put in jail for 3 months, I was able to track down the Fort Saskatchewan jail register. Now these jail records provide more detail than many family may have about their great-grandfather or uncle. This is again an example and deals with the man that we just saw being illegally charged and jailed for 3 months. This is a closer image of what was indicated on that larger record. His details: he was married, this was his first offense, and he cannot read or write in English. Jail records also show what they owned, when they were brought to jail, how long they stayed, where they were released to, and what they were given in jail. Next, let's take a look at what is available at the archives in Ottawa, at the Library Archives Canada. The Northwest Mounted Police records are a very important aspect of any search about prairie life, because the Royal Northwest Mounted Police were an important feature of prairie life. They often assisted pioneers of every ethnic background to survive the prairie winters. They kept in contact with homesteaders by being required by their own system to conduct weekly patrols, as we see in this slide. Not only did they have to visit every homesteader and ask them about any issues they also had to secure the homesteader's signature on the patrol card. I have found some of these cards with signatures and short details about who and where the homesteader was. These cards were read at the Regina headquarters of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. And I have found reports of constables being ordered to do these patrols, especially when they forgot to do so. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police not only investigated criminal matters, but also non-criminal deaths. Their reports often provide valuable and personal insights into life on the prairies, as illustrated in the next few examples. Some of the details and records I'll reveal over the next few minutes may be disturbing to some of you. The first case, which does not fall within my current area of interest, but which I have included to illustrate the information which is available in these non-Ukrainian fonds, because they provide significant insight into prairie life. One such case is the death in childbirth of Martha Bahri on August 10th, 1916. Their infant son also died, leaving Vasil to fend for the 3 children that they had left by themselves. This is the second page of the crime report that was prepared by the police at that time. Of note is what I've circled, that the coroner recommended that, quote, for the government to introduce some method of inducing people of foreign nationalities to obtain medical assistance for their wives at childbirth. The police also considered charging Vasil under the criminal code. but ultimately the records on the file indicate that it was not done. The next case is a situation where a 6-year-old boy accidentally shot and killed a 3-year-old girl with a shotgun left unsecured by the girl's father. The children had been left alone for 4 hours. The girl's body was found outside in the bushes where the boy had dragged her from the house. The boy's name was Stephen Pawluk, and the girl was Wasilina Kozma of Pecan, Alberta. This happened on September 15th, 1916. There were also inquiries into mining accidents, and this is just one example of them. This was an inquiry about one William Kochuk, who died as a result of a mine accident on June 4th, 1916, in the Brazeau mines in Nordig, Alberta. He was Austrian and 23 years old, and a member of the Society of the United Mine Workers of America, who paid for his burial. This then indicates, in the highlighted area, some of the details of how this accident happened. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank again the organizers of this conference, and again your kind invitation to participate in this conference in this long-distance manner. So if there are any questions, I'd be most willing to entertain them during the Skype portion of this presentation.
Now when Mark is back, questions for Mark, and I'll read the first question.
Hi, Mark. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
It's Winston, Mark. You and I have talked about this. I was a little confused by the slide you showed, because I was under the impression that a large part of the internment, the roundup of these Austrians, had to do with the fact that they didn't have, the proper citizenship papers. They were subjects of of an enemy, and therefore they were rounded up largely for that reason. Your records show that they were rounded up for crimes such as loitering, vagrancy, those sorts, not carrying the proper registration papers. So it wasn't sort of a wholesale, holus roundup then.
I'm sorry, I just missed that last statement.
Yeah, it wasn't. I had the feeling that it was a roundup much like the Palmer raids, and instead you're saying that these people were arrested and put in the internment camps for specific charges, criminal and civil kind of charges.
There are some examples of that happening. However, I would say that significant numbers were interned because they were destitute. And I've come across, interestingly enough, certain Montreal, a lot of people there were interned because they were destitute. So the issue of crime is a new development in this equation. For example, one of the case that I came across was a fellow who was seemingly interned because a police officer extorted $300 from him, and he went to report the extortion to the Estevan RCMP detachment. So, in essence, he was interned, and when I look at his records, there were 5 different reasons why he was interned. So clearly they were trying to get this guy off the street. Now, the police officer wasn't actually charged, and there was a trial, and I found the transcripts of the trial, and he was put in jail for a year as well. But this is just a new development where part of it was people would be charged with not registering, and they would be interned. But I also came across situations where somebody was charged with a criminal offense, like destroying property or something, but there was insufficient evidence to convict somebody in a criminal court. And the bottom line was they were found not guilty, but because we knew he did the crime, we'll just intern him. So there were some situations like that as well. And this is what's interesting about these criminal records, because again, this is just a whole new area. And it's really been quite interesting and exciting. And again, I just want to keep thanking Jars a lot for putting me into the bed of newspaper records, because I've also gone through and spent the hours going through page by page newspaper records looking for examples where people were charged with being a member of a prohibited association in late 1918, or having prohibited publications on them. And one of the cases discovered in Sault Ste. Marie was there were about 4 or 5 gentlemen that were charged for belonging to a prohibited association, and they were fined almost $20,000. Now, when somebody was making $300-400 a year, $20,000 is a hefty fine. So there's those sorts of records, but again, most of those records are not digitized, so you really have to go through the old-fashioned way and look through page by page.
Minenko, it's Radomir here. And just in addition to Winston's comment, I think that sometimes we get so caught up in the term interned that really the broader thing gets lost, is that the War Measures Act empowered a good sector of society to bully anybody they wanted in any way that they had an excuse to. And it didn't necessarily involve finally being interned, it just involved being taken advantage of under the powers that were granted through the Act.
Yes, that's correct. And that's where I try to illustrate that point through the Zapperzan situation. And this is one of the areas that I'm writing about these illegal arrests. Because for until 1918, when a new order in council came in, which required every person to register, and this is outside of the National Labor Registration. So aliens had to register doubly for the labor station as well for the alien enemy. But until 1918, if you had a fixed address, if you had a homestead, you did not have to register. But I found thousands of situations of people just in the Lamont, Andrew area, of people being charged, even despite the fact that the police evidence itself, as I indicated in one of those records, clearly gives a homestead where somebody's been living. Therefore, they should not have been charged. They should not have been brought into jail overnight. They should not have appeared in front of a judge, and they shouldn't have spent 3 months in Fort Saskatchewan jail. And that's the hidden issue that I think that I'm sort of writing about and discovering. And I think it's interesting with the work that Radomir has done over the last decade or so to tie the information I'm finding with his information and confirm the homestead, as well as using the provincial archives homestead records to then individually prove the cases that where people were charged. And I've come across Justice of the Peace records. They said, I just convicted 2 guys for not asking permission to leave X place in Alberta. Could you please send me what the law is? Because I don't know what the law is, but I still convicted these 2 guys. So, and this is what I find really exciting and finding and tragic at the same time in looking at criminal records, because it does reveal these inadequacies in the system. And in fact, the provincial government in Alberta recognized that, and they actually had a lawyer who was the primary contact with Justices of the Peace. And he ended up writing 2 books, one in 1917 and another one just after World War I, saying, which are basically titled, How Justice of the Peace Are Supposed to Do Their Jobs.
Hi, Mark, it's Yars. I just wanted to announce to the group here that if any of you have sad chapters in your family history that you'd like to see expunged from the records, you should talk to Mark, because he'll know where to go with your whiteout. They do a lot of these criminal cases are really quite interesting. You see all these Ukrainian names for all kinds of things: alcohol offenses, loitering, breaking and entering, all of this stuff. So if you have any relatives with a colorful past, you can always deal with them.
There's even a famous Ukrainian name that I won't mention who was charged with driving down the wrong side of the street in Vegreville. But the most interesting ones I found were, and I didn't understand what this was until I started seeing a few more of them, is people being convicted of having MASH. And I'm going, MASH? Don't say yeah, and having had some of the product of MASH, I then clicked in as to what these charges were. So, what I mentioned earlier about the provincial archive staff referring people to me is while I'm sitting there, they say, you know what, we've got this person here, and people would then come in and say, yeah, the guy that sits over in this chair had something. Could you tell me where it was? So, and as I remember going out for a fire alarm, and I'm talking to a young fellow, and I said, you know what, let me check to see if your great-grandfather's on my list. We went back in, and his great-grandfather was, in fact, on my list. So, there's something about his family past that he didn't realize.
Hello, Mark. Just curious, what was the penalty back then for driving on the wrong side of the street in Vegreville?
I think it was 5 lashes of spaghetti, I think, or something.
$27.50.
Oh, it was you, ain't you?
I came across some interesting fellows by the name of Polan, by the way. And you could sort of see what trouble they caused at the Fort Saskatchewan jail, too, by the number of letters they wrote.
I think this is where we should move to the next presentation. Thank you so much. So our next presenter is Aleksandra Hnatiuk, and the topic of her presentation is Vladimir Kislevsky's collection as an important source for studies of international context of Ukrainian issue during interwar period. And Aleksandra is from Kiev Mahila Academy. She's a professor of the Center for East European Studies, University of Warsaw as well, and a visiting professor at the National University of Kiev Mahila Academy in Kiev. where she has the Master's in History program and coordinates a joint Master's program between the Academy and the University of Warsaw. She is a member of the board publishing series Ukraine Europe 1921-1929. Aleksandra served in the Polish diplomatic corps from 2006 to 2010 as the first consular. She has received numerous awards, including Polonia Destitute, Republic of Poland highest state award, and the Antonovich Foundation Award for fostering Polish-Ukrainian cultural cooperation. Her most recent books are Farewell to the Empire, Ukrainian Debates on Identity at the Turn of the 20th and 21st Century, in Polish 2003, in Ukrainian 2003, in Ukrainian 2005, and Courage and Fear, and it's 2015.
First of all, I would like to thank you for a kind invitation, and especially thanks for Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, who helped me to travel here. It was a long distance travel from Kyiv to Edmonton. And first, I would like to thank Ksenia Kibuzinsky, who turned my attention to this Kislevsky collection. And few words about this documentary series, which is part of a bigger project devoted to the interwar Ukrainian-European relations, the place of Ukrainian issue in international relations during the interwar period. So we have very, very many ambitious plans, and one of them was publishing works of Olgierd Boczkowski, who was philosopher, politician, and the inventor of Gnoseology. He was like a predecessor of people who are studying nations' problems. So he was student of Masaryk, and he spent his half life in Prague. He was of Polish, Lithuanian, German origin, but his choice was to be Ukrainian, and he made this choice in Prague. So here you can see just 2 volumes of his works, and I believe that to the end of this year we will have the 3rd volume, which is really important also because of papers, statements where he published during the last period of his life, namely late 30s. Then he went to Canada, he visited also Edmonton, and here in Edmonton he published many of his papers. But my talk will be today not about this really interesting man, but on the other, not less interesting man, Vladimir Yulian Kisinevsky, who after 1940 became принял he was K, not Kisilevsky. On 1940, he changed his last name to K because it was too complicated to pronounce Kisilevsky. So my interest is and talk is on his part of his collection. The collection is in Ottawa National Archive, and the part I am talking about is London, so-called London Diary. So, few words about the person, a few words about the London Diary, and at the conclusion, why it is so important that we decided to publish the whole diary, and I guess we will not stop just on the diary. We will go ahead with some correspondence from his London bureau, London Ukrainian bureau. Of course, it looks like that interwar period of Ukrainian history is very well known, but in fact the situation is not as good as it seems to us. We know very little about international context of Ukrainian issue during this time. The first reason is the burden of communism. The second is the burden of Cold War and its ideology with sharp division, with no place for phenomena in between. During last 3 decades, one can observe very positive tendencies, but the main challenge is to put Ukraine in a broader context of European history and international relations, that time and today. The London Diary, 1931 and 1939, is a part of the collection of K. Kisilevsky, a prominent Canadian Slavic researcher and public figure. It is an example of exemplary work by archivists and preservation of the heritage on the most prominent Canadians of Ukrainian descent. Canadian historians have repeatedly turned to the collection of Kisilevsky, focusing their attention on the materials about the Ukrainian settlers in the province of Alberta, collected by scholars in the post-war years. However, the pre-war materials in the collection didn't cause particular interest either in Canada or in Ukraine, with one significant exception. I mean the very thorough article by Orest Martinovich, Canadian scholar, and a very pure paper by, not paper, just a study, it was a book of Polish historian Andriy Nahachewsky from Jagiellonian University. The most important part of the interwar period of the collection is exactly London Diary, a unique source for studying the international context of a Ukrainian issue. In my opinion, only the publication of the diary of Volodymyr Kisilevsky may pique the interest of a broader range of researchers, in particular in Ukraine, but also in Canada and the United States. The publication of a diary is planned within the framework of a publishing series, which I presented already. It is a part of project of Ukraine Moderna and Petro Jacek program for study of modern Ukrainian history and society at the Qs. Now, some words about the author of a diary. Volodymyr Kisilevsky belongs to generation of independent Ukraine. He was born in Kolomea at the end of 19th century in a Ukrainian intelligentsia family. His father was lawyer, and his mother, Olena Kisilevska, was an activist of the women's movement, a writer and publisher. She also became a senator in the Polish Second Republic parliament. Kisilevsky completed his secondary school education in Chernivtsi. In June 1914, a month later, the First World War began. In that period, he joined and served with the Ukrainian Sich Riflemen. After the defeat of the liberation struggle for independence, he once again found himself in Vienna. There, he studied to become a construction engineer, but under the influence of Vyacheslav Levinsky, his interests turned toward history and genealogy, and also to the, in political sense, to Hetman movement. It was also Lipinski who encouraged Kisilevsky to study Slavic studies in Vienna. After receiving his doctorate degree for his work on Galician nobility, Kisilevsky went to Paris, and from there he emigrated to Western Canada. It was early 1925. There he first studied agricultural affairs, and later from 1926 to 1928 he served with the Winnipeg Grenadiers, hoping that good military training would be very useful in the future struggle for Ukrainian independence. His illusions disappeared fairly quickly. The creation of a separate Ukrainian unit wasn't successful. Volodymyr Kisilevsky, having finished his service, began working as a journalist in Edmonton at the Western News, now Ukrainsky Vesti, Ukrainian news publication. The Great Crisis of 1929 affected all areas of the economy, including the publishing business, and Kisilevsky had to look for a new place of employment. His uncle, Volodymyr Simenovich, the publisher of the weekly Ukraine in Chicago, became instrumental in forming the future chain of events. It was thanks to Simenovich that in late 30s, Kisilevsky met Jacob Yakov Makohin. Makohin was also an immigrant who arrived in America in 1903 and began serving in the naval forces in 1905. During the First World War, he became a first military pilot and was promoted to the rank of officer. He was commissioned in 1920. Makohin has just returned from his regular trip to Central Europe, where he witnesses the brutal crackdown on the Ukrainians of Eastern Galicia carried out by Polish administration, known as the pacification. Makohin activists within the territory of the Lviv region caused the fierce reaction from the Polish administration and expulsion him from Poland. The decision to create bureau in London was made by Makohin after receiving a message, or more exactly, cryptogram, about the meeting of League of Nations in early 1939. And I will quote, Makohin sent to Kisilevsky a telegram with quote of the cryptogram. The League Council reprimanded Poland for its treatment of the German minority of Silesia. The Ukrainian petition will be considered by the Committee of Three, consisting of Anderson, England, Minenko, Norway, and Pilotti, Italy, to meet in London in March. Advice better teamwork among Ukrainians of the United States and Canada to assure success of our present work. 3 months later, on April 30, 1931, Makohon sent another telegram to Kisielewski, this time with a proposal to head the bureau in London. Kisielewski accepted without hesitation and arrived in London on May 17th. Initially, the bureau was lobbying for support from British politicians for a Ukrainian petition to the League of Nations to protect the rights to the Ukrainian minority within Poland. Gradually, the bureau began to serve as an informal Ukrainian representative office in London. The bureau prepared newsletters, provided information to British politicians and journalists about the fate of Ukrainians in Poland, Romania, and the USSR, allocated funds for trips of British politicians to Valichina, among other activities. In addition, Kisielewski systematically sent information on initiatives at the Forum of the British Parliament and International Forum to Ukrainian newspapers, both in Poland and Romania. Kisielewski also accompanied Ukrainian politicians who arrived in London and arranged meetings in Parliament and the elite Royal Institute for International Affairs, known as Chatham House. Among his guests were Mikhailo Luchkovich, the first Ukrainian representative in Canadian Parliament. On the eve of the battle for England, Volodymyr Kisielewski received permission to return to Canada and took the last name K. After his return to Canada, he worked as an officer of the National War Services until the end of the war and the head of editorial section of the Nationalities branch of the Department of National War Service. Afterwards, he worked at the Secretary of State and Citizen Immigration. After his retirement, he devoted all his energy to teaching, research, and public activities. It was during this period that he collected unique materials about the first Ukrainian settlers in Canada. The London Diary covers the time period between 31 and 39. There are two versions of the diary, the edited and the original. In the first half of the 70s, Volodymyr Kisielewski was preparing his diary for publication, corresponding with Sviatomir Fostun from the UK on this subject. However, publication didn't occur, and a copy of the diary was returned to his widow, Grace Kay, after the death of the author. The handwritten and edited versions do not differ significantly, with one exception: records of the year, and it is crucial, year 1933. Only this one exists only in handwritten form. The diary is an extremely valuable source for studying the international context of the Ukrainian issue in the interwar period for several reasons. Firstly, it gives insider information about the attitude of the British and Canadian governments' circles to Ukraine, or Ukrainian issue, a subject which hasn't yet become the target of research. Secondly, in the diary there is very rare information about the Ukrainian issue in politics of European countries. Thirdly, the diary gives a detailed description of the links between emigration and the old country, including the activities of Canadian Deputy Mikhailo Luchkovich, the meetings of Ukrainian Galician politicians with British Parliament members, representatives of the League of Nations, and the representatives of emigrations groups. Fourthly, the diary highlights a variety of Ukrainian activities in the international scene, from the petition to the League of Nations concerning pacification through an attempt to strike a big blow of anxiety during the Holodomor, up to the attempt to make Carpato-Ukraine issue international. I skip this and I will finish my presentation on such notes. The notes for the last 2 years of the diary, 1938-1939, show the desperate situation in which Ukrainian issue found itself on the eve of the Second World War. In the notes of this time, we find a large number of previously unknown and surprising information related to the emergence and the defeat of Carpathian Ukraine. The diary ends in 1939 when the Ukrainian Bureau ceased its activities and its author enters the service of the British Ministry of Information, preparing radio programs. In May 1940, the London period of life for Vladimir Kishilevsky ends and a new Canadian one begins. He begins this new stage with a new name. Okay. This is the end of my presentation, but I would like to conclude some more words of conclusion that the edition of documentary series Ukraine, Europe, 1939 is an attempt to put Ukrainian history and Ukrainian issue within broader context and to reveal the place of Ukraine in the international politics. It is extremely important, especially today, when Ukrainian independence is in danger. Despite the real war, one can observe also virtual war. Manipulating of the past is one of the most successful instruments. The notion that Ukrainians are not historical nation, Ukrainians are unexpected nation, the Ukrainian state is seasonal, unstable, and is doomed to fail. It is very, very, very common. Other common claim is ostensible tradition pro-German orientation of Ukraine, so-called Austrian intrigue, and ostensible Nazi collaborations of Ukrainians. Documents printed with book series Ukrainian Europe 1921-1949 prove that Ukrainian issue was not marginal. On the contrary, it was central in politics of most powerful countries, not only Soviet Union or Third Reich. Ukrainians appeared to be the victims of this conflict. The war of Ukrainians was much longer. It lasts even in the interwar period. It starts with just after the Paris Peace Conference with the resolution not recognize or not to support Ukrainian independence. After that, League of Nations, who was supposed to guarantee the minorities' rights, didn't protect Ukrainians in Poland and Romania and didn't stop the violation of their rights. In a very short time, international public opinion observed the death of millions of people during Holodomor. This silence wasn't just indifference. It was the first step in politics of support for Soviet Union. Now, this politics is known as Russia First. That's why the governments with signed agreements of non-aggression with USSR implemented censorships and strong limitation of public activity of those who wanted to support victims of Holodomor. They were not only Ukrainians but also European politicians and clergy. But the power of Third Reich arise, political public moods in Europe have changes, and the amount of supporters of Ukrainian issue decreased. Ukrainian card was captured by the Soviets and Nazi leaders.
I'm sorry. That's faster. I'm sorry.
Okay, just one more sentence. This project has strong connection with today's situation, not only because of involvement historical topics as an instrument of virtual war. The main aim of this project is to prove that Ukrainian issue was crucial for the future of Europe, and still is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Aleksandra. Any questions?
Could you repeat your last sentence, please?
The last sentence was just about this project of Ukrainian Europe 1921-39, and in my opinion, this project is really important because of today's situation. No, not only because historical topics are implemented as a part of virtual war, but the main aim of the project is to prove that the Ukrainian issue was crucial for the future of the Europe then and now.
Thank you, Madam.
I guess I wanted to give more of a comment, or maybe add a little bit to what you were just saying about the importance of the Ukrainian question in the interwar period, and to just give some information on sources, additional sources, archival sources. One of these sources is the British, I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I would think, is the British Foreign Office papers. And in the 1980s, our institute supported a project by Yaroslav Koshev, who went to Yaroslav Koshev. He's living in Britain now, and he made photocopies of documents from the British Foreign Office that pertained to Ukraine. And part of these documents were then selected and turned out in this volume on the British Foreign Office and the famine. But I'm sure that there are plenty of documents about the British opinions or views and reports on what was taking place in Ukraine, and of course their opinions on the Ukrainian question and how Poland was handling it and its international ramifications. The other thing is, I was in the United States recently, in Washington, D.C. and in Maryland, where there's just outside of Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. there is the National Archives and Records Administration, which contains State Department records. And the State Department and the U.S. had diplomatic relations with Poland in the interwar period. And in their online guide, there is a collection of microfilm, 75 reels of microfilm, that's titled Poland Internal Affairs. Now, I haven't looked at that closely, but one could maybe investigate that to see if there is any materials on Ukraine or Ukrainians and on the Ukrainian question. So just additional comments on maybe future work that could complement some of what you're undertaking.
Thank you. Other questions?
This is like Stefan's this is a comment like Bogdan's as well. There is a Canadian aspect to this, other than when Kay came to Canada, because the Ukrainian press office was a venture that had strong support among Ukrainians in Canada, particularly the Ukrainian Self-Reliance League. And this is thinking that, you know, if we're going to promote the Ukrainian cause worldwide, we have to be able to give reliable information. We have to deal with people of a certain level, at a certain level, sort of like not just do things in church basements or church halls, but actually step up to the plate internationally. So it wasn't just an embassy, it was almost like an international representation, quasi-representation.
Other questions? So, okay, yes. So, if not, let's first thank Aleksandra. So, our next presenter is Dr. Andriy Nahachewsky. He is a Husulak Chair at the University of Alberta, and also he is the founder and long-term director of a Kiel Folklore Center and curator, again for a long time, of Bogdan Nahachewsky archives. He was teaching a variety of courses at the university, and modeled very popular and unique course in Ukrainian dance. And I won't list his numerous publications. He is a very fruitful scholar and very interesting researcher. And today's presentation is entitled A Research Perspective on Ukrainian Immigration Narratives in Canadian Archives.
Thank you very much, Yelena. I think that's a pretty hard act to follow. It was a very interesting and colorful discussion. My presentation will also be quite personal, but also very explicitly about archives and the archival process. So one current project that I'm interested in now is tentatively called Telling Immigration Stories. I'm interested in the story of immigration. I'm interested, historians have mostly looked at these immigration stories in terms of the historical information in them, but I'm interested in the story part of the immigration stories. I'm interested, like many folklorists are, in motifs. I'm interested in seeing the patterns of the motifs in my projects, and particularly the stories are often told, sometimes they're told immediately after the events, and sometimes they're told half a century after the events. I'm interested in the factors during the storytelling moment that affect the content of the stories that they're telling. I have this hypothesis that the stories are changing as they're being told and retold or told with a distance. So generally speaking, I'm interested in them as creative nonfiction. So in order for me to focus on something more particularly, I'm going to be concentrating on specifically the moment when they talk about from when they left their town or village, and the journey itself. And I'm going to concentrate mostly on the first wave, although I've collected a lot of information and stories about the journey in the interwar period and in the post-World War period too. I'm interested in themes of displacement when they leave and emplacement when they arrive and become emplaced in Canada. I'm also interested in the relationship with nature, and I'm also interested in any bits and pieces that I can get mentioning indigenous populations as well. So in my project so far, I've collected, I don't know how many stories, but I'm guessing somewhere between 500 and 2,000. I spent a few months in 13 different archives across the country in the fall of 2016, and I'm still taking my 50,000 photographs and collecting them into PDFs that have one particular story in one computer file. I'm particularly interested in retellings of the same story. If I can get a case where a person told the story and then later on told the story again and then later on told the story again, that's really useful for me to talk about the storytelling situation as it affects the story. I'm interested not only in published versions, although definitely I'm interested in those. I'm also interested in manuscript stories, manuscript versions of their stories, and also audio recorded, maybe video recorded. I'm collecting versions of the story in the first person, so I did this, I traveled here, I remember that, and also in the third person, so he, my grandfather, she, my grandmother, told me that she remembered this, so it's autobiography as well as biography by other people later. And I'm interested in specific individual stories versus generalizations. When a person said, in my particular boat ride across the Atlantic, we sat here and we ate this and this, compared to stories where historians will say, Ukrainians always were in steerage and they always ate this and got seasick, etc., etc. Because the generalizations are stories as well, but on a different level. So these are the archives that I visited on that particular trip. I started in Ottawa and bought a Via Rail pass and took the train and stopped every time I came to a city that had archives that I thought would be good for me. And these are the places that I ended up going. I placed that list in chronological order, traveling from east to west, although I had considered, because I really want to talk about the archives themselves rather than my project, I considered organizing them in terms of which ones were the largest archives, because they struck me in particular ways, and the medium-sized archives struck me in particular ways, and the smaller ones struck me in other particular ways. Or maybe I should organize them, the richest ones to the poorest ones, or I could organize them in a variety of ways. Maybe the most valuable for me collecting stuff to the least valuable for me collecting stuff, although that would be really hard yet. In any event, chronological is one way to do it too. I really want to talk about the researcher's perspective. Actually, most of my career, I've actually been a researcher in archives embarrassingly little. I've created more archival stuff than I've used archival stuff. So this is a new hat for me to wear, and I'm enjoying it, and I learned a lot by doing the process. From the researcher's perspective, any particular archive has a variety of different phases, let's say, in that relationship. First of all, just learning about it, finding out about it, and then once I've decided I'm going to this archive, finding the various materials inside the archive, accessing those materials, getting permission to use it, maybe copying them, and then using them after I've left the archives as well. But I'm just going to concentrate on the second phase of that, I think, in the time that I have, and just finding the materials once I've already arrived at the place or when I'm preparing to arrive at it. And I've got 5 different points in that finding the materials thing. The knowledge that the archivist gives to help me, the finding aids that are online, finding aids that are there on paper, so I have to be physically there to do the paper ones, just browsing, and things that happen by accident that help me as a researcher or don't help me as a researcher. So the first of those is archivist knowledge. And I have to say, during those 2 months that I was doing that archival research, I was blessed with a lot of archivists sharing amazing hints and tips and facts with me. I'd like to recognize James Kominowski, who's here, Robert Klimash, who isn't here today, Sofia Kachor, who wished she was here today, Boris Martinovich is not. Myron Shatulski has been helping me in previous projects, but by the time I was there in Winnipeg in the fall of 2016, he was not feeling well, but he has helped me before. And they gave me lots of ideas as to where I should go, where are going to be the rich places once I explained my project to them. In Ottawa, great thanks to Myron, who took me to Tim Hortons and gave me a whole bunch of ideas. One of the example will be specifically his saying, Olha Wojtsenko, you've got to go to hers because she'll have a lot of stuff, especially that you need. I wouldn't have gone to Olha Wojtsenko's thing on my own. I thought I knew what kind of stuff might be in there, and it didn't seem like rich for me, but thanks to Myron, I found out it was greatly rich for me. I also consulted by email when I was going to the Library and Archives of Canada, LAC, and they gave me some hints by email, the professional consultants and archivists that are there, and I booked a half-hour session after I arrived in Ottawa. They sat down with me, heard my story, and said, okay, you should go here and here and here, and you should find that finding aid and this finding aid. So archivist knowledge was really important for me. I'll stop at Winnipeg and Ottawa, but definitely Toronto with Pani Vinitska and others, Saskatoon, Regina, Edmonton, had a lot of things. One concrete example of that is Marina was communicating over email. I was in Europe at the time she wrote this one, and she's saying they just got this Andrew Mazurenko family collection, and she gives the email thing there, and on the bottom she adds a sentence, Andriy, there's quite a bit about the journey itself. I thought it might be useful for the project. So I think many researchers are blessed with archivist knowledge, and I'm certainly quadruply blessed with many people that helped me in my project. I want to thank them all right now. That's the archivist knowledge. Whenever you're doing research in an archives, be aware of the great help they can do. And if you are in archives, be aware of how much you can help other people and you change the researcher's experience with your knowledge. And that's a fantastic thing. The larger, more established archives typically have online resources. Library and Archives of Canada I'll use as my example mostly. Archives of Ontario, University of Manitoba, Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan, the Medvitsky Folklore Archives, and the numerous other ones have online things. The Manitoba Museum doesn't really have online things, but they sent me by email, so I put a little bit there too. It's kind of the bottom edge of online access to the material. But let's look at the Library and Archives of Canada. I hadn't been at the Library and Archives of Canada really since they developed their online stuff a lot more in an established way. So I kind of was like a novice researcher when I went there. When I just went on their very front page, it has a search thing. So I typed in Ukrainian and hit find, and it came with 90 hits. And I thought, oh, that's not so many. But as it works out on that front hit, as far as I understand it now, that's really, it searches government websites. It took me a few seconds to figure out I have to click to the online research and then click to the archive search, and then I can start searching. And then when I typed Ukrainian, did exactly the same thing. Suddenly I had 6,277 hits. It takes a little while for me as a researcher to see all this colored stuff, but really the information I was looking for is teeny-weeny on the 7th or the 10th line. And it took me a while to navigate the pages just to be able to focus on the information I need. So for a novice researcher like me, and perhaps like other people, it takes a while to learn the ropes of learning the ropes in some senses. When I clicked on the 6,000 here, I did it the day later, and it's now 6,770 instead of 6,290. So overnight, the National Archives did another 500 sites. That's fantastic. Or else something is different in the website. 6,770, oh my God. The first one, Alien Press in Canada. The second one, George Lisauvet on the name of the Lemke. I thought, oh my God, it's going to take me 6 months just to go through the 6,770. This isn't a good searching method. The machine is too powerful. There's too much stuff. What can I do? On the left side here are a series of filters, and they ended up being really important and good for me. I just now pulled out the bits of that left side and put it on another screen. One of the things is they have a date for filtering, and I thought, well, that's excellent. I'm interested in pre-1914 immigration stories, so maybe pre-1914 is where I look. But then it might be the date of the content of the story, but maybe it's the date when the person wrote their memoirs. So they wrote the memoirs in 1970 about 1919. I don't know which date to use. Or it may be the date of when the archives accessioned the document. So maybe it's in 2000 that the 1970 stuff about 1905 is recorded. So the dates ended up being not very useful for me. Probably you know what these dates really are. Which date is it? But I didn't know at the time, and I thought, okay, that's not the way I'm going to try to filter it down. Type of material on the second column was really useful for me. I wasn't interested in most of them, but definitely in sound recordings, of which there are 370 out of my 6,000. Okay, that I'm interested in, but mostly textual material. And that's the vast bulk of it there in that particular archive. As it worked out, hierarchical level seems really abstract to me, but it ended up the most useful filter, as a matter of fact. The most important things, this is really detailed, but the most important 4 categories were the fond, or the collection. So that's the big thing. Let's say Myron told me about Olha Wojcinko. So her big collection is on the fond level, and that's important for me. That is subdivided into series, and series are subdivided into files, and files are subdivided into items. So 4 levels of hierarchical organization. And if I just concentrated on the highest level and didn't do all the other one, my 6,700 went zoom, zoom, zoom into 130. And okay, I can at least scan 130 things to see which ones I want. I give an example of Olha Wojcinko, and I see there is some textual things there. It seems pretty good. I learned something really important, typed in small print right away. Access restricted. Okay, that meant a different behavior for me as a visitor. As it worked out, it wasn't that hard to get access to it, so I did get access to it there. I clicked on that and I got a more detailed description. Really important most of the time is the scope and content. In this case, actually I wasn't so impressed because it still didn't really say something like stories of immigration of early immigrants or something like that. It gave a whole bunch of people's names and things that didn't click to me. If I was scanning 6,000 of them, I would scan that and keep moving. That's not going to be in my top 10. Another problem with it, language of material, English. No, actually 3/4 of it is in Ukrainian. That's just some part of it must have been in English and the archivist recorded it that way. And another important thing in small print, 18.38 meters of material. I'm guessing that's about 60 boxes. That's that entire wall filled. Okay, now we're in business. Other things, but I have to figure out what within those 60 boxes is interesting to me. Other ones that seemed as big as Olha Wojcinko on the surface level were actually 45 pages, not 60 boxes, but 45 pages was the entire font. So there's a lot of variety, and I'm still just getting oriented. As it worked out, I did go into the Olha Wojtsenko ones. I found lots of juicy stuff in Yaroslav Rudnitsky's material and lots in Vladimir K. that Aleksandra was talking about a little while ago, exactly when he did his research after he was in Canada on the early immigrants, with lots of great material for my project. Ilya Kyriak's was going to be really important for me, but very quickly I learned that his entire collection was digitized and available online. Zoom. It's off my list because I can do that once I get home. I don't have to spend my Ottawa time paying for a hotel to do stuff that I can do at home. So I spent the entire 2 weeks, 14 hours a day with those 3 collections, and I probably wished I would have had double time just with those 3, never mind any of the other 131 that I had. It's a huge, rich thing. It was a really good eye-opener for a researcher in an archives, how much stuff is in a giant place like the Library and Archives of Canada. Another example is the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan, and me as a researcher found it really to be quite different. One of the quirky things about the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan is that half of it is in Saskatoon and half of it is in Regina. They don't really have an online searching tool. What they do have is quite a lot of stuff online. They have a master index to finding aids right away. Actually, I think they do have a search tool, but I didn't use it very much because I found this. The master index to finding aids is 233 pages just of listing of the names of the finding aids, just a listing of the names of the collections. I went to one that sounded good to me, Oral History Projects, and I choose it as an example because it talks about the audio materials, GR251. I found GR251, and that's the one that's 233 pages long, just of tightly typed lists of oral history interviews, thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews that are on cassette or whatever it is. And they had a special subset. One particular project was The Ukrainians, done in 1973, and they had 84 interviews, which would have taken me half a week or a week to listen to them all in order to find out. So I couldn't get into the audio, but it was really interesting for me because in one of the columns it says transcript on the far right side of the screen. That was really good. I asked for the transcripts, which are much faster. I can speed read or skim or look for keywords or look for paragraph topics or something like that. So I never did get to the audio. Audio is darn hard, and I want to talk about that. So they don't really have searching things, but if you look at the master index, it gives you the secret key, which is the number of the finding aid, and the finding aid gives you the secret key, which is the interview and the location and other stuff there. So 3 or 4 stages I had to go to find the goal that I was interested in, but really still successful, and they had lots of stuff for me. Probably my favorite is the Archives of the Ukrainian Experience at the University of Manitoba. Wonderful, wonderful organization for me as a researcher. It's not the biggest archives of them all, but I love being there. Thank you, James. I'm disconnected from the internet now. Sorry, I turned it off because it jumped up at me and I pushed it away. I wanted to click on there. The beautiful thing is, no, I have to show it. Crap. Thank you. So later on I'll talk about the problems with online things. Same one as you. There we go. Well, I'm so used to Macintoshes. So you come to the front page of the Ukrainian-Canadian experience. It gives you a general introduction, and then I really like, it goes into a list of the archival collections. There's enough of them that it fits on a screen in my little computer on my desk. On my laptop, it's kind of 2 screenfuls, but I can just review quickly, and in this case I'm really interested in Michael Iwanchuk because I know he wrote a bunch of books about early immigrants. I click on that, I learn it's according to the rules of archival description. The title of the font, 11 meters. It gives a biographical sketch, a little bit of custodial history, which I didn't really care about in the beginning, but the scope and context was really interesting for me, and within a few seconds I already knew, okay, Michael Iwanchuk, these are the ones I want. So from the introductory page I clicked one button and already I was getting oriented. I drilled down to the Iwanchuk thing, and then I drilled down to this one, or the second one or the third one. This one is a list of box by box, what is in there, what is in box number 1, folder number 22, and I keep scrolling down, and pretty soon I got to concrete interview with such and such a pioneer, and here's the story. And it was really cool because I could listen to the actual interview, which I got access to from there. I could see the transcript. I could see the transcript where Iwanchuk translated it into English because the interview was in Ukrainian. I could see Iwanchuk's editing notes, and then I had the book, and I could see how the same story in 5 different variations, edited by the historian, he kicked out all the stuff that didn't fit what his ideology was in his particular book, what was his punchline, and the little nugget that fit his punchline ended up in the book. And I could see how that immigration story was molded and molded and molded. It was great for me, and I could do that in 60 seconds, already know what I wanted. It was great. I have lots to say about Michael Iwanchuk, but not today. Finding aids in paper. Finding aids in paper was very important for me. Good. Of course, big archives like the Library and Archives of Canada have paper finding aids as well. Besides all the computer ones, there are the paper finding aids for specific fonts, which are nice because they're in an order that doesn't slip around on you, and you can see that it's 250 pages long right away, and you know that you're on page 47, etc. One finding aid, number 1066, is called Guide to Ukrainian Canadian Materials, 1978, by Myron Momrick. When I had the interview with the current archivist who was giving me references to things, she referred me to the 1978 thing that Myron had done, because they haven't done an awful lot since Myron retired. And she also said, do you need Myron's phone number? Because really, that's the best way to find stuff out. And there was another paper finding aid for Minenko, which was really important, and Rudnitsky, etc. They were much more easy for me to use to get oriented as to what box I needed than the digital stuff. Oseredok has not really things online, but they have a guide to their holdings that was done in 1998, which is 20 years ago, a little more recent than Myron's things. They have 71 fonts in their collection. This guide is 113 pages, and here's a short one. It's kind of in the same format as I was showing from the other one. Also, Ors Martinovich was there, and he gave me his draft folder list of the Marunchak collection, and he told me, you got to go there because there will be a whole bunch of good things for you there too. And I highlighted in yellow which ones I wanted to, and Ors brought them to me. Multicultural History Society of Ontario also doesn't have things nicely online, but what they have is their interview index card. They have maybe 200, 250 Ukrainian interviews of their thousands and thousands of interviews from 54 different cultural groups in Ontario. And this was really useful for me. I got to see a summary of the contents there so I could figure out which ones were ones that I wanted to listen to. Again, I didn't listen to a single one because audio takes so much time. Prairie Center for Ukrainian Heritage in Saskatoon, they don't do little summaries, and they don't do these verbal descriptions, and they don't do keywords, but in the collection, this was Natalia Honenko-Friesen's project, this particular one from 2002, they did a kind of an index. At such and such a minute during the interview, this topic comes. At this minute in the interview, the next topic. So it's done on an interview basis, on a topic-to-topic index basis. And then lots of interesting things happened to me when I was browsing. Browsing works really good for paper, but doesn't work very well for audio. I guess tomorrow we'll hear of Natalia Kononenko's project, who engages with that issue of searching through audio in a more effective way. There were lots of collections that are unprocessed for sure, that I didn't have access to, although I was drowning in material. I had 2 months and I needed really 2 years to find what I thought would be everything would help me. There were some very positive accidents for me. There were negative accidents as well. Rudnitsky's audio recordings are listed online in the National Archives of Canada, and when I asked for them, they couldn't find them. And they just said, we think they don't exist. All kinds of other accidents happen that take you in directions other than where you thought you were going. Saskatchewan had amazing questionnaires in the 1950s with 3,500 people answering standard questionnaires. I'd love to go back there sometime. Now my conclusions. 3 conclusions bo chutrici buvaje. 1, it's critical to make finding aids available. If there are not finding aids, then a researcher like me is not going to find that stuff, and the work that was done in collecting it and processing it so far isn't going to get at least this potential researcher. If it's not clear, if it's not easy to get, a guy like me is going to skip it because I'm going to go for the low-hanging fruit. So the thing to do for the archivist is make their fruit hang low for me so that I will go to it. Research will choose the easiest options. So many times at the Cool Folklore Center, wearing the other hat, we have, hi, I'm in grade 11. I want to know something about Ukrainian wedding traditions. My essay is due tomorrow afternoon. Can you help me? So they need super low-hanging fruit. And we just say, well, just Google it. Because that becomes the spoiler. It's such low-hanging fruit that they won't go past that. Conclusion number 2, and this is something really autobiographical, that hierarchical idea of having fond and series and folders within those and items within those. As a folklorist, as Marina was saying this morning, I really am interested in the items, so my ideal heaven would have everything down to the item, and I could go, tell me about the voyage on the ship, and it would give me 3,749 ship stories, exactly that paragraph. That's not going to happen in the real world. What I really learned from this experience on the researcher side of things is that the high-level descriptions and the medium-level descriptions are really powerful and really important, and they can indeed steer me to find the items. The online versus paper. Online is obviously fantastic if I'm far away, and paper is really fantastic if I want an orientation to see more than one page, more than one screen at a time. The accidental things that you find when you're browsing and you're flipping a page, and oh, there's one I didn't expect, is really important, and that happens easier on paper. And conclusion number 3 is about audio. There's lots to talk about that, but that's a separate paper. Thank you very much.
Questions from the? Thank you. There is a question.
Thank you for the presentation. A question about oral stories. And as you know, our first peoples, the stories of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago are relied upon to justify certain things. And hopefully with what we're doing and what we're interested in, the stories won't just get recorded and filed. Somebody will use them. Do you foresee, or are you dealing with any issues with authenticity or reliability?
Oh yes, there were some great comments about that this morning, kind of defending oral history as a research method. And somebody says memory. Memory is, every time you tell a story, it's like rewriting over that same cassette tape. So you're erasing the previous version and writing a new version of the cassette tape. And then if you tell the story again, you erase that version and you rewrite a third version of it. So every time you tell the story, you are recomposing the story and recomposing the facts, and also overlaying your previous memories and things. So they're not the same as a paper document. In some ways they're different. They have different strengths. What they do as you rewrite and rewrite and rewrite over the tape is you keep it relevant and you really engage with the storytelling moment and the person who is the storyteller at the moment of telling as well. So it's a hybrid document telling partially about the past and partially about the future. There's lots of theory of oral history, historians critiquing it in terms of its thing. It covers lots of topics that the other documents might not cover, but you have to treat it in a certain way. I know for sure when my dad told a fishing story, and the first time the fish was this big, and the 10th time the fish was that big, he probably changed the size of the fish, but he didn't change the species of the fish. He didn't change the lake that he was fishing at, because that didn't help him as a storyteller. So there are all kinds of things we should be really careful, but there are some things that are actually we can engage with. So I do think indigenous storytelling and using that as documentation for the past. We need to deal with it carefully. They need to deal with it carefully. It's not, as some people suggest, useless information. In my case, my whole project is actually designed to explore that. Because I'm now looking at it critically as storytelling, I want to explore how my dad changed the fish story, or how Michael Ivanchik changed the immigration story, or how another person, after telling the story 30 times, changes her or his story. So that's a good topic for research rather than a topic justifying throwing it in the garbage. We live by stories. We can't throw them in the garbage.
So Andriy, when you were there at many of these places, were you able to make copies of things? Can you speak to both the paper copies and audio copies if it was possible?
In some places, indeed, I was actually given the possibility to make audio copies, and sometimes they were just given to me. James just gave me a CD of the ones that I had asked for. I didn't ask for the entire archive full kind of thing. So if it's a reasonable request, I think they'll do that. Reasonable in terms of not very labor intensive for them. In terms of copying for research purposes, I had to sign a form. Most of the archives allowed me to have a camera there. I bought a nice tripod that held the camera vertically, and I took probably 50,000 photographs, which I'm now putting together, which is as big a job as photographing it. The archives of Alberta were the only ones that said no photography, but we will photocopy it for you at 35 cents a page. So that cost me a number of hundreds of dollars, but I got a lot of access to there too. So generally speaking, archives are wanting me to have this as a research material, and I need the text because I don't know how I'm gonna analyze it, I just know I'm gonna need the details in the future.
And I was just curious about the audio, because you could then take it and go listen to it on your own time rather than the 1 week you had also.
Correct. I can, in most cases, I can buy the audio. They have to cover their costs for making it, which is a bigger job for them.
More questions?
Okay, so I will talk a bit more tomorrow about using audio recording. but I'm very familiar with the PCOH project that you mentioned. I think I'm the only person who's ever listened to all 100 interviews. And so I know that with their transcripts, it's indexed based on their topics that they were looking to get information on, and then that's the information that they put there. And so you're missing like 95% of every interview if you only look at those like partially indexed transcriptions. So I don't think there's an answer to this question, but how as a researcher do you think you can access those without, like, especially with narrative, like those are the stories when people are speaking, and is there a way to capture the full immigration story without listening to those or whatever story you're looking at?
No, I think we'll have to listen. I think you'll partly answer that tomorrow as well. Any kind of transcription, musical transcription, transcription of the words, transcription is always a subjective thing, and there are parts you capture and parts that miss as you translate it into that new language of the transcript, and so it's always imperfect. But having a 5% hint at the content is a heck of a lot better than having 45 minutes with no clue as to what's in there. So I think it's a good option for archives to at least give that. That particular project, I think, is right. They were interested in particular topics so that the index really reflects their pre-designed topics. So it's really a strong dialect of what another transcription would be very different. It's still better than nothing and very valuable to me.
Hello, Andriy. Thank you for your presentation, and I have a question. You actually described your experience working in archives in Canada, but what about your experience working outside of Canada, and what you can tell about what archive is like best organized outside of Canada about Ukrainians?
I can speak very little about that. I've hardly ever been in archives. I had actually amazing success in Ukraine in 1981, during the middle of Brezhnev's time, or they say he was alive anyways. If you have a pokryveti and they get you in, then there's lots of amazing stuff there. So audio, visual materials on dance. I actually got everything I wanted to and held my video camera in front of the big movie theater screen where they projected these 1950s dance videos, and I made a copy of them with my technology. So I had great luck there, but I can't really comment on, let's say, archives in Ukraine because since 1991 I've actually never used archives in Ukraine. I make them myself instead of use other people's stuff.
I believe we need to move to the next presentation, and if anyone has more questions about Andriy's experiences in different archives, we can approach him personally. So, Radomir completed his bachelor and master of art degrees at the University of Manitoba, majoring in cultural anthropology and minoring in Ukrainian. He has associated with the Ukrainian cultural heritage village since 1977 and currently holds the position of senior historian responsible for the research associated for this award-winning open-air museum. He is also the project manager of the Alberta Ukrainian Genealogical Project. Until recently, he was long affiliated with the University of Alberta, serving as adjunct associate professor and lecturer in the Department of Modern Languages and Cultural Studies, where he taught early Ukrainian Canadian culture course, and this is how I first met him virtually, requesting a syllabus. As well, he was project manager for the local culture and diversity on the Paris research project at the Kiel Folklore Center. Most recently, he has served as consultant for the St. Onofrius Ukrainian Catholic Church revitalization project at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. He has authored articles and presentations on Ukrainian Canadian culture and history. And his presentation is entitled "Who is Going to Care About This? The Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Research Program Collection."
Thank you. Who's going to care about this has been a constant theme since the beginning of the, since the inception of the research program collection at the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village. Initially, the village started off as a dream from the local community who, right in the very beginning of the years of multiculturalism, the new years of multiculturalism, felt empowered. And they wanted to put together just as good a museum as anybody else had in Canada under bilingualism and biculturalism, except they're going to tell the story of Ukrainians through the eyes of the Ukrainians, not be told their story. And so that got started privately by the descendants of the very first Ukrainians to come and settle in Alberta, the very first settlement. And that went fine for a while. They were surviving by donations, especially corporate donations, and after a couple of years had to go back for more donations. And about the fourth year in, people were saying, you know, maybe you have to go somewhere else for a donation because we think that we've given you enough. And in the end, the dream ran out of steam. So what they then did is look around for a larger sponsor, and in the end convinced the province of Alberta to take on the responsibility for the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village with a couple of provisos. They wanted their story told. They did not want the name changed, which even to this very day can be a bit of a problem. It's quite a mouthful in Ukrainian, so originally it was in English. And so the government then sat down and was given, through the bureaucracy, into the Department of Culture, this museum called the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, and then set about to find out what it had just acquired. And so one of the first things that they had to do was define that story of the people who established the site. What is there to work with? And so a young master's student called Francis Svaripa was hired to find out what exists about East Central Alberta, what exists about the story that they wanted to tell. And she came back with 4 very thin duotang folders, because in print at that time, not much had been written down about Ukrainians in East Central Alberta. And so that was the first problem as defined. But that did help the first master planner at least take a direction to go in. And the underlying theme that they tried to expand on, which I'll read you from my screen, is the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village depicts the history of East Central Alberta. In other words, it's a regional history to a defined date, to 1930, primarily through the eyes of its predominantly Ukrainian settlement. And so Roman Fotchik and Associates came up with a concept and about an 80-page document called the Master Plan, which defined at least sectors of what this site would look like when it was completed. They thought they could do it in about 3 years. They'd never done one before. And so it defined certain zones and just generally described from their ability to do so what those zones should be saying, what they should be. There should be an urban center. There should be a rural community. there should be farmsteads. That's the story of Ukrainians. We all know that, don't we? That's what Yido said. And just in case, repeatedly through that document, they said it would be good to do some more research. And at that particular time, just as that Heritage Village Master Plan was being accepted, the first advisory board to the minister was struck, and it was struck for the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, and is the longest standing advisory board to this date. There are many others that have come and gone, but what that advisory board did do, under its first head, who happened to be also the first head of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, Manoli Lupul, stressed that it had to be research correct. It had to be properly done. It had to leave a legacy beyond a bunch of buildings and displays. And so that became the direction in which the village started to go. And so they broke some sod, they built some buildings, and they started to detail the master plan. So they talk about urban centers. What is that? It turned out to be nothing, because there were none. Further research showed. And then, so what does this town contain? Well, the one that was inherited contained everything that you saw on TV, on Bonanza, Ponderosa. You had to have a cafe, you had to have a livery barn, 5 cents a ride, and so on. But the more research was being done, the more a different story was being told, the Western Canadian story. The Western Canadian story that was being also developed within the realms of its Ukrainian settlement. And so what that really set off was the gathering of secondary sources, anything that could help that site achieve success. And so the statistical, there's actually a law that governs town planning in Alberta. What does it say? Well, what we all know, they're a dime a dozen, because you take the same template according to law and you put it, and that governs how your town site develops. So what do you have in the town site if it's not like Bonanza? Well, you have lots of things. You have a pool room, you have a general store. In fact, you've got about 5 general stores. A garage, all kinds of things became the shopping list for this site. And a lot more research had to be done to make this believable. And so that became, again, the governing direction of a research program. The research program had not really been established yet. This is 1978. But there were still tours going on. The site was open. The village would get its summer students, 10 whole summer students, to run the site with every summer. And of course, the site wasn't very well known. So the summer students would sit around, and the word got around it was a really good place to get a suntan. And suddenly they found out that they could also be researchers, because they were put to work. Because we had to find out the answers to those questions, and at that time, the full-time staff of the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village was a total of 3. Plus 10 equals 13. So they were taught, they were coached on the very basics of ethnographic field methods, except all of it had to be done from the village, using the mail, using phones, doing oral history interviews by phone, because it was finally concluded there's not too much more specific about East Central Alberta that exists other than what's up here and what comes out of people's mouths. And that became the beginning of a very largely expanding area of Ukrainian Canadian history, oral history that was applied to recreate the history of these individual buildings and really tell the story of what they were all about, not the imagined one. So one of the first things that had to be done, you may have noticed there wasn't much growing on that landscape, yet there had to be a landscape program. And lo and behold, in the Provincial Archives of Alberta was one of the last maps done on horseback, series of maps done on horseback, that detailed the species of trees, the diameter of trees, the height of the trees, everything that you would want to recreate a historic landscape. So everybody pulled out their IBM Selectric typewriters and went at these things and started, as you can see through the paper on the underside, started creating tables of what those maps actually said. Not exactly an Excel file, and searchable if you made little ticks. Of course, we wanted to preserve the earliest experiences of homesteading, And the easiest way to do that was by photographs. So I got to go to the archives and I'd say, I'd like to look at all your photographs on Ukrainians. And without a shadow of a lie, they showed me 5 photographs in the Provincial Archives of Alberta. It was 1970-something. Multiculturalism had just started. This was not an important topic for the Provincial Archives of Alberta. It is now, but things have changed. So I said, well, why only 5? And I got a very typical pre-1970 answer, which I went through as a student. And it was, well, you know, those people didn't have cameras. So we thought about that on the three-man staff, how we were going to proceed, because we knew that there were photos out there. They just weren't in the archives. So then we put together an agreement with the Provincial Archives of Alberta as a fellow branch in the Department of Culture and said, now suppose we found some photos. Would you mind if we collected them on your behalf? And they said, yeah, sure. And suppose other things like oral histories, would you benefit from those? Oh, sure. So in the end, the agreement was, at that time, struck between Dr. Roman Ostashevsky, first director of the village, and Brian Spears, acting director of the Provincial Archives of Alberta, that the village could become a satellite collection of the Provincial Archives of Alberta. And within, I can't remember exactly how many years, we had collected a couple of thousand photographs, which are now in the Provincial Archives as a separate collection, in great deal thanks to Andriy Nahachewsky at the back there, who did manage to get them isolated and acknowledged as a special Ukrainian village collection. So if you go to the archives today, you will see the UV collection alongside the Gavinchuk collection, alongside the Brown collection, and it's more than 5. So of course we have prints in our collection, in our working collection. And this was the time of finding aids, non-electronic. So did we want another card index? Did people even then still want a card index? No, they wanted to see, so what's in the photograph? I don't care about the topic, what's in the photograph? And so this is what became our system of card indexes. We don't want people handling the actual photo, it wouldn't last long. So we Xeroxed every photo, put the information on the back like a card index, and put them in binders, which are still being used today. And then we took the actual photos and put them in acid-free envelopes, the way we were advised by the Provincial Archives, and put them in the collection according to donor. And then we got permission to use them in future, because this was still a time where legalese did work. Not as detailed as what it is today to use a photograph, but nonetheless, we followed the system at the time. Then we went forward, first in FileMaker, because that was the wave of the future, and then eventually transferred over into Excel. And even in our own office, we have a finding aid. Might even, I dare say, be slightly better than the Provincial Archives finding aid, because they didn't convert all of the photographs that we had collected, only the ones that they thought were really worthy of an archive. So our collection is actually larger. But here's a search of the word house, and these are the ones that come up. And so again, it is not the finding aid that is preferred today, but it was on the way there. Then the built heritage, what is there to choose from? So we had a company go out, a consultant go out and take photographs and do their research, and then we had some of our people going out. We had a project manager or site manager at that time named Paul Sambalyuk. That was a little bit of everything, going out into the countryside. And our big acquisition one year was a Polaroid camera. And so we took Polaroids of these buildings and brought them back, and that helped us sift through things. And unfortunately, that's the way they sit this morning, is this photograph. Nothing's ever been done of them. And most of those buildings are gone. So something's still left to do, perhaps. By 1979, we'd figured out what we wanted to do with that original concept. We've been following it ever since. The research program has used that as a direction ever since. And as a result, we got to actually start the building-specific research, which based itself mostly on oral history. To do that, we had to, just for those summer students, and that was the first time that I heard the phrase, "Why do I have to do this? Who's going to care about this anyways? Just do it, you'll be fine." And then about 8 years later, we published our first report using interview citations from that grade 11 student's work. So it's kind of nice. Send her a copy in the mail and say, this is why. So the research binders had a standardized format, which holds to today. One section on reports, contacts, field notes, tape synopses, interview indices, questionnaires, artifact materials pertaining to the specific study, documents, photographs and field photos, historical photos, blueprints, drawings, correspondence, historical overview, temporary receipts, and about 3 more topics. And that way we could keep these studies cumulative. People could keep coming back and adding to those sections, signing off on their particular work, dating them so that we could cite their work in future. When it came to the interviews, we had to make certain decisions. Who was going to use this anyways? And a lot of these interviews, quite purposely, we were conducting in Ukrainian. We could not make a transcript of these interviews. They were in dialect. The people that we had working with the interviews were not all that capable of writing down a transcript in dialect. So we did it instead, trying to satisfy the best and the largest audience. And we do synopses of the interviews, sprinkling them with Ukrainian words when the person doing the interview is capable of doing so, and also indices, giving the footage under the same topic as the synopses, and then those become sections of 3 main works for each building. One that satisfies the restorers, and that's called the land use and structural history, teaches them anything and everything that they wanted to know about restoring a building and its yard. The next report becomes a materials history report, which describes every single item that needs to go in that building in a given period so that the curators can go on ahead and furnish it. Now you have a dead display. The final report is called a narrative history, which describes the daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly processes that took place in that very building throughout the year in a given period. And that allows the interpreters at the site to become that person or those people. So we do interviews that are first person and interviews that are third person, people who actually were in the building and people who visited, people who said, oh, that was my neighbor and this is what they did from the outside. So field notes are then developed with a given format, with a repeated standard templated format, with an explanation provided as well. In the case of using foreign usage, the rest of the line is, we use the revised Library of Congress system of transliteration. Don't make it up yourself, please. People do. Tape indices, here's what we do with tape indices and why. Interview synopses, this is how we do a interview synopses and why. And so by 1983, we were well underway, but very, very slowly because budget was not coming. When you're in the Department of Culture, you know that you're not on the top rung of the ladder. And when the economy is good, you're great, and you're full of everything. When the economy is not so good, you're struggling. So the economy was doing pretty good in 1983, and the Ukrainian community invited out Premier Lohi to the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, the first and last time that a premier had come to the site to unveil a statue. Came in his helicopter, waved down to the masses, and he got off the helicopter and was immediately surrounded by complaining voters who said, how many more years are you going to let this pile of wood sit here like this, rotting away? When are you going to finish this village? So he thought about it carefully, and between Sunday and Monday built up a little bit of steam, and on Monday morning phoned several ministers' offices and tore strips out of them and said, there's an election coming, I want to know exactly how much it's going to cost to finish that bling bling village. That was told to me. I don't know if it was the exact conversation. But it did get a result because the Minister of Culture at that time dictated that this document will appear, and that created money to support research, restoration, curatorial work, to the tune of, according to this document, $16 million. And within a week or two after the election was over, they did an edit and it became $8 million. But do exactly what you said was in that black book. We call it the black book. And so we set out to do, with some assembly required, the completion of the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village on 33 buildings in 8 years. So we needed a standardized approach to the research. And then in the meantime, we did manage to publish some works. Some of them were even thematic, as was described in that black book. So we have something by Martinovich early on, which was a summary of what all the research to that date had been. We had a backgrounder to the equivalent of doing family history, Sources in Ukraine by John Paul Himka. And then we had something by Robert Klamash describing rituals, describing the folklore of East Central Alberta. That was number 21 in the series, and that was the last one published. Because after 1992, there was no money for anything, never mind research and publication. We did manage to squeeze in an exhibit on weaving, and all of that still remains in our archives. Most recently, we are now preparing to take on the archives of a program that's existed for nearly 13 years. The Alberta Ukraine Genealogical Project is now completing its work this year, and within the documents that people submitted in their nominations to have their ancestors put on the monument are a whole series of files where people have indicated a willingness or an unwillingness to donate their research, which when you have 6,000 files of research is very valuable information, to the village research program. But it still remains the question, who's going to care about this? So far, we have a very great archives. We've talked about doing all kinds of finding aids and getting ahead and getting online. The AUGP, the Genealogical Project, has done very well on getting some of its materials online. But budget is budget, and where is this going to go becomes our question. Thank you.
Any questions?
Where is this going to go?
What is what? Sorry? Oh.
I'll just repeat the question.
Thank you, Radomir. So you said Lieto was the last book, last research report published, and there was no research done since then?
No, there has been research done since then.
But no publication?
But there have been no, at one time, we used to be part of the Research and Publications program. Then we became the research program, last headed by Petro Melnitsky. And then Petro Melnitsky was moved into the generic historic sites or historic resource management program as part of a group of historians. And I remained on with the village because I said, it doesn't make sense for me to move. I may as well continue on what I've been doing. At that time, the village was part of the Historic Site Service. And I was the last of the Mohicans. I was the last historian in the Historic Site Service. The village is now its own branch, so I remain as a historian with the village. But our productivity has been few and far between in recent years, and more of the productivity that I have been involved with has been the genealogical project, getting various information, geomaps, getting into the detailed history of Lamont County, the cradle of Ukrainian settlement in Canada, while keeping in mind that there were nearly 150 reports produced by the research program originally, and we managed to publish 14.
So where is all those research? And who can access it and how?
You can access it by contacting me. And I'm just over there in Old St. Stephen's College. Some people call it Radomir's Castle. And so you can contact me and have a look. The photographs, or at least, are at the Provincial Archives now. In recent times, the tapes have been transferred to the Provincial Archives of Alberta because it's the only copy.
And every couple of years, I would get a summer student to run through all of the tapes to make sure they weren't bleeding and maintain them. But we don't even have money for such a person to do that. So the archives finally did take them in. And because these are government documents and government branches, now the discussion is kind of circling around, so are you going to pay for the copying, or are we supposed to pay for the copying? And so I guess they're in a safer place now, but they haven't gone much further.
There's another collaborative project for the Friends and some other organizations, maybe pioneers.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Radomir, it sounds like with about 130 some unpublished reports, that, and they're all in paper, they're like really easy to scan.
Mm-hmm.
They could be relatively easy to be put up. I'm wondering, I know you probably personally don't have time for it, but maybe that would be a good thing to work towards, so that that information would be available, although there may be copyright problems, interview problems, I don't know.
Well, that's exactly what I have been moving towards as quickly as I can move towards. We did, through the Friends of the Ukrainian Village Society, I think it's now 6 years ago, get a summer student as part of Canada Works, who took all, I missed a slide somewhere. In all of these years of doing that work, you have to remember all the different media that we've had. So we started off the earliest reports with Wang word processing floppies, like the real floppies that flop. Then we had somebody transfer all of those to the one-sided floppy in the plastic casing. Then they were transferred over to the double-sided. Then they were moved over to the zip drive. Then they were moved after that, and moved after that, and moved after that. So this person, in between missing pieces in the files that were beginning to fall apart, managed to piece them all back together, kind of ready to go. So that's the good news. These days, we are in a very protective manner in government. And I don't know if Myron ever came across this, but suddenly these are not viewed just as an archive, but this is a government document. So it's not exactly copyright, but even when we publish them, we had to have an editor go through them. They're far from perfect. They were produced as internal documents to assist in the restoration of buildings. So there is work to do, yes. 130 some, no, I'm not going to last that long. Is somebody going to move that forward? Maybe. But that's where we sit right now, is we have all of the text digitally preserved. The illustrations that went into those reports were done by a terribly state-of-the-art method of PMT, as it was called, illustrations. So that involves tracking them down in our archives, which is not hard, and scanning them our way now, and inserting them back into the text, and then getting them ready to be a book, an e-book, an online whatever, but there's still so many steps. The interviews, you can say the same thing.
I'm sorry, I wasn't at Christia Paulos' presentation, but I see from her abstract that the URDC is involved or has initiated an oral history of Ukrainian Canada project. So are there any connections being made between these two initiatives?
No, and partially because we are a dedicated project with very tight focus. Our thematic, as I pointed out to you, was on the books, but it was the first thing to fall in terms of a priority. So it's whatever it takes to research a building in those 3 stages, and here's the punchline to the joke. You get 18 months, done. You're not finished? We're restoring the building, we're furnishing the building, we're interpreting the building. And in some cases, like in 1991, when everybody was scurrying around getting pink slips because the Klein government said we're cutting you in half, They said, and oh, by the way, that third phase that you haven't finished yet, we closed the books. No more third phase.
If you don't mind my asking, you did the oral introduce for the genealogical project as well, right?
No. No. That, through experience, we realized we could never make work to an end. And so that particular project, in consultation with the partners, we presented 4 main streams that we would follow. The idea of oral histories was a natural, but we could not afford to bite off more than we could chew. And that, again, is separate from the villages. It is.
Yeah.
Radomir, your slide with my dad in it brought to mind something that might affect many people in this room because they have parents that were active in many organizations. And I'm presently going through my father's collection of projects he's worked on. So what do I do now when I've got Paul Sembelik's collection, but part of it should maybe go to the Ukrainian village? Some was with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, some was with Chernomosh. Do I keep it together, or do I split it and send it to the organizations that he worked with?
I think you'll get better thoughts if you talk to James Bonkowski, because I don't think he'd ever tell you to split it. It is the life work of one individual. Yeah.
But do I let the other organizations know I've got this little?
Of course. And in fact, the archives, through their publication, is doing that anyways. You know, you can find, if somebody did a search of your father and he's included in the next edition of the Ukrainian fonds in the archives of Alberta, his name will come up. So anybody who wanted to know about the work of your father in whatever organization that he was in would know.
Anybody else? If not, I will just share.
I'm sorry, this is from a different research project of mine, but I would like to know if Mark Minenko is left-handed, because that would make it all 4 of us.